We wanted to talk to you about the Arizona One Cup, All Cup machine, the manual one. As you can see, this is one of the units here. While they're very well built machines, from time to time they do need maintenance. Sometimes about a year or after, the heat elements may need replaced. Sometimes it could even happen while they're under the warranty. So we want to talk about how to check the machine for any potential problems for troubleshooting if there is an issue. On this particular unit, we were using it, and as time went on, the temperature began to drop and it could not maintain or keep the 170 degrees Celsius required for the single serving cup and the 180 for the espresso type cup. So real simply, there's four screws, two on the front, two on the back. Just use a screwdriver or drill and remove those, and then you'll be able to pull back the cover and look inside and see what the problem may be. Aside from the two in the front and the two in the back, there are two hexagonal bolts on each side that if you loosen it allows this whole plate to come off. So we'll show you how that's done. After removing the screws in the front and the back, you loosen with the hexagonal wrench. Don't need to take these off, just loosen these two bolts and this whole panel will come forward. And what we found best is to just set the panel like this. If you pull it back too far, you could yank wires loose, but this will set right like this, and then you can begin to look at it from the back or the sides. And I advise you to check all wiring while you got it off to see if any wiring is loose. You'll notice on these machines that they use hot glue guns before they ship them over from overseas to hold the wiring in place. But every once in a while, a wiring or a device can come loose. So we'll talk about some of those things to check in just a moment here. As I mentioned, the components are usually very neatly and nicely put together, and even hot glue is holding them together. If you ever have a problem with the timer up front, it could be that it came loose. Check that. In this case, that's all fine. We've checked all the wiring in the front. It all looks good. Checking all the wiring in the back. It appears that everything looks good on the wiring. We mentioned on this particular model that we're having a problem with the heat. Well, this is the main components with the heat, and it's not simply a matter of the temperature not reading properly, because that would possibly be the thermocouple that goes into the digital temperature reader. But in this case, because it's not holding a temperature, it's going to probably be one of two things. It's either going to be the relay, which is right here, or it's going to be the actual heat tubes, which are down here. One thing that you need to check, and this is where you need to be very careful that all your electronics are in proper order, nothing's loose, is you will need to see if your relay is working. So you'll actually have to plug the machine in and turn it on in the front. And as you can see right here, the light lit up. Because that light lit up, that indicates that the relay is working. As the temperature builds up to the maximum, if it does, you may see that light turning off. But because that light lit up, there's a very good chance that it's not the relay, but it's the two or one of the two heat tubes. And while you cannot see very good, maybe if I have a flashlight on this, if you look with this fireproof seal here or sock. If you begin to see some signs of burning on the ends, which I can see right here, it's a pretty good indicator that one or more of the two heat tubes is going or has gone bad. The fact that this one heats up sometimes and then begins to drop off may indicate that just one is bad, but it's best to replace two. And if you look, of course, now you want to unplug, turn it off and unplug it. You never want to work on any electronic machine while it's plugged in. You can see that there are two bolts that you take apart, and then these heat tubes slide out, and then they connect at the electronics here. So let's take those out. If you ever do have to replace the heat tubes, they come like this, and they're wrapped in a white grease. You may want to buy an additional container of grease. It's a special kind of grease. We'll show you a picture on the website, because that lubrication is what helps keep the heat elements from burning out. Keep in mind on these machines, if you're turning them on and you're not using them at the time and you're going to leave it for an hour without using it, you should turn them off and unplug them. Excessive idle time will cause the heat elements to burn out faster. So let's see how quick it is with the screwdriver, how you can remove the two screws here, the heat elements slide out, and then we'll do the wiring, and then we'll have this up and running in just a matter of minutes. In order to remove and replace the heat tubes, as mentioned, there's a screw, but there's also a bolt up against the plate here. And as you can see, no matter what you use in the way of a screwdriver, you can't get it down in there. The secret is not even using a screwdriver at all. Take a pair of pliers or a wrench and loosen that bolt that's at the bottom. And after that, you could hand screw it all the way to the top. And then the little bolt or the little screw and the nut, as I mentioned, will completely come out. When the nut comes out, that releases the heat tube to where it can slide completely out of the heat plate. As you can see here, we've slid this one out, and now we're about ready to slide this one out. Might take a little tug. Remember, there is a grease that's held between here that actually helps to spread the heat and lubricate the heat tube so that it doesn't burn out. So I'm just snipping off the plastic tie, and I'm going to pull back this insulated piece where the thermocouple wire comes through. And at this point, you may decide just to replace the heat elements at this point, utilizing it from your new one, or you may decide to replace it all the way up. That's entirely your decision. Just be very careful not to clip off the thermocouple, because if you do, you'll never know what the temperature is without replacing the thermocouple. Depending on where or which heat tubes you got, if they came like this, they have the white grease, as we call it, thermal grease, already on the product. But it does good to get an extra container of this. You can get them through Amazon or eBay for $4, $5, $6, and add a little more grease, because this is going to increase the thermal conductivity between the heat element and the heat plate, which is going to give better heat distribution, and the grease is actually going to extend the life of the heat tubes. And with each unit, you get a maximum of one set of heat tubes replacement under the warranty. So they will last about a year or more depending on whether they're taken care of properly. But we highly recommend using the thermal grease in order to extend the life of the machine and extend the life of the heat tubes. I was probably a little excessive in putting the grease on, but I'd rather have a little more than not enough. Now I'm going to slide it down in there so you'll see the mess that I create as I push it all the way in. Make sure you get all this junk out of the way. Push them both in all the way. Make sure they're completely in there. And then we're going to tighten them down with the screw and the nut. I removed the old wiring, but I left the fireproof insulation over that part of the thermocouple to protect it, because I'm just going to run this line back through it as well, and then I'll put ties on it. You don't get ties when we send you beyond what comes with the heat tubes when we send you a new one, but I highly recommend that you go to the Home Depot or Lowe's and just get a small package of them for a couple bucks. They always come in handy anyway. And they have the really small ones, which we'll show you in a couple of minutes for finishing up this project. But just feed that back through there. That way you got a nice insulation, fireproof insulation where the thermocouple is as well. If you can see these screws, I've twisted the nut all the way up to the top, and I'm just going to hand put these screws in as tight as I can get them, and then we'll tighten down with the nut afterwards. For the sake of doing the whole picture right, I decided to loosen these two screws and just replace this line and plugging it into those two screws. Which, by the way, before you start any test of checking the parts and telling us that there's a problem, always check to make sure these little wires are attached and tightened properly, because the whole problem could simply be your wires have come loose here. In the case of ours, where it would heat up for a while and then it would slow down, it could have simply been a loose wire here causing a poor connection to where it heated up for a time and then stopped heating up. So this could be your main problem right here, and you can have your machine up and running without having to wait for parts within an hour or less, or even a half an hour or 15 minutes, by checking these wires connections and tightening them before even requesting service or parts. So you've got the whole thing tightened down. Really tighten these good, but don't tighten them to the point that you damage any of the components. And now all we need to do is use these little ties, and these are the size to use to connect all the parts. Remember, we had a connection down here with the where it connected to the thermocouple wire. So put that one in so you don't accidentally pull a part out. And we've already tightened down our screws so that our heat elements stay in place and don't come out down here. And so they should be nice and tight. And of course you can pull back if you want a little bit on the insulated fireproof sock or fabric there. And then just at various places don't go crazy, but do a couple of these ties, and then you'll want to snip them back when you're done. You may want to, at this point, even test everything before you tighten it all down, just to make sure you got everything right, so you don't have to go back and redo anything. But I would say that one of the most important things to check is the connections here before you do any work at all, because if it's just one loose wire, or even just a semi-loose wire, that could be what's preventing your entire machine from either heating up or staying hot. So this should cover it all. We'll close up the case and we'll be ready to get going.